The sun rose over Fort Page like a relentless overseer, casting sharp light across the sprawling training fields. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, and the smell of sweat and motor oil mingled in the air. Private Connor Willis, barely 2 weeks into basic training, struggled to keep pace with the morning drill. His uniform was already damp with sweat, the stiff fabric clinging uncomfortably to his back, and his boots scuffed against the gravel with each step. He had joined the army eager to prove himself, eager to escape the life of uncertainty he had left behind. But right now, the desire to look capable collided with a sense of panic he couldn't shake. "Willis, keep your eyes forward," barked Sergeant Delgado, voice cutting like a whip. Connor snapped his head up, heart hammering, blinking against the sunlight. He had been caught staring at the perimeter fence again, distracted by the way shadows stretched along the wall and how the metal gates gleamed in the morning light. He knew the sergeant's reputation for zero tolerance. One misstep could mark him as incompetent. Connor had spent the last 2 weeks trying desperately to avoid that label, but each day felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of humiliation. The drill today was different. Instead of the usual obstacle courses or marching formations, Connor had been assigned to the crowd control exercise. A simple scenario: trainees would face a line of role players simulating hostile civilians, and they would demonstrate restraint, control, and tactical application of pepper spray. It was meant to teach confidence, but for Connor, it was a nightmare waiting to happen. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the canister strapped to his chest, feeling its cold metal against his palm. He repeated the instructor's words in his mind: confidence, precision, control. He didn't need to be reminded, but he felt the mantra faltering in the pit of his stomach. As the other trainees lined up, Connor scanned the participants in the role-play lane. They were ordinary-looking, nothing remarkable except for a woman standing to the side, clipboard in hand, observing silently. She was dressed in a navy jacket that contrasted sharply with the khaki uniforms of the role players. Ordinary, yes, but there was something about the way she held herself, the sharp tilt of her chin, the intensity in her eyes. Connor assumed she was an assistant or perhaps a visitor from another unit. He didn't register her significance, only that she was in his peripheral vision, close enough to be distracted by. "Positions," barked Sergeant Delgado, snapping Connor out of his reverie. Connor forced himself to step forward, the weight of the canister heavy in his hands. His mind raced. Act fast, look confident, don't hesitate. Confidence, he reminded himself. Confidence was the only thing separating him from appearing weak. He had spent hours practicing his stance, his aim, his gestures, but all rehearsed discipline evaporated in the moment his adrenaline spiked. Connor stepped into the designated lane, scanning the volunteers. His eyes darted quickly, missing the woman who had drifted forward without him noticing. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to show decisiveness. The instructor's eyes were on him. He clenched the canister tighter, lifted his arm, and squeezed. The blast hit. A stream of pepper spray shot forward, and in an instant everything erupted into chaos. The line of role players coughed and staggered, raising hands in panic. But one figure faltered in a way that made Connor's stomach drop. The woman in the navy jacket screamed, staggering back, eyes wide and watering, hands flailing to protect her face. Coughing racked her body as the acrid spray burned her skin and eyes. Connor froze, mind blank. He had aimed at a volunteer. He had not aimed at her. "Private, stop! What are you doing?" shouted Sergeant Delgado, racing forward. Around him, trainees recoiled, some coughing, others whispering urgently. Connor's chest heaved. The world seemed to slow, yet the heat of the spray, the panic in the air, and the disbelief of the spectators pressed on him like a vice. Someone muttered, barely above a whisper, That's the Admiral." Connor's eyes widened. The woman staggered, blinking through the haze, and suddenly the truth hit him like a punch. He had sprayed Rear Admiral Elise Harland, the base's commanding officer, the person whose mere presence could silence a room filled with seasoned soldiers. Fear slammed into him, making his knees feel like jelly. He wanted to apologize, to kneel, to disappear, but his voice caught in his throat. Elise Harland was no ordinary officer. She had a reputation for icy precision, unyielding standards, and a glare that could cut through steel. Connor had read about her in briefings, heard stories whispered in the barracks. She was fearless, exacting, and utterly relentless when it came to discipline. And now she stood coughing and burning, yet somehow still upright, still imposing, still assessing him as if weighing a puzzle. Medics rushed to her side, offering towels and water. She waved them off, brushing away the spray with deliberate, controlled movements. Connor's mind raced. Punishment, court-martial, immediate discharge. Every scenario felt worse than the last. The other trainees backed away, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Connor's chest tightened. Every step he had taken toward proving himself now seemed like a catastrophic mistake. The heat of the day pressed down, but nothing compared to the heat in Connor's stomach, the fear, the shame, the disbelief. He could barely move as the Admiral, still holding herself upright, extended a hand, not for assistance but as a signal. Walk. Connor obeyed, each step toward her like walking through molasses. In the corridor behind the training field, silence enveloped him. Every instructor, every trainee, every observer seemed frozen in place. The weight of the moment pressed on him. He followed her into the briefing room, his palms clammy, sweat streaking the sides of his face. The door closed behind him with a sharp click, sealing the space in a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. "Sit," she commanded. Connor dropped into the nearest chair, knees shaking, heart hammering in his chest. She stood in front of him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Every instinct screamed at him to explain, to apologize, to plead. But words felt useless, trapped in his throat. The only sound was the distant hum of the bass and the quiet shuffle of medics cleaning up the aftermath outside. Elise Harland studied him, unblinking, unyielding. Then she spoke. "Why did you act?" Connor's voice faltered. I wanted to show confidence," he managed. "I didn't want to seem afraid." The Admiral paced slowly, her boots echoing against the floor. "Confidence is meaningless without judgment," she said. "Impulse masquerades as courage. Fear is not weakness, it is information." Her words struck Connor like a blow. He realized in that moment that he had not just made a mistake. He had revealed himself, raw and unfiltered, to one of the most disciplined minds in the military. The room was silent. Connor swallowed, sweat dripping from his brow. He wanted to sink into the floor, disappear entirely. And yet, even as he trembled, he sensed that something unexpected had happened. This was no ordinary reprimand. This was a lesson. The kind of lesson that could break him or transform him. The Rear Admiral paused, arms folded, studying him with the precision of a chess master. Connor met her gaze, blinking rapidly, unsure if he should apologize again, or simply sit and endure whatever judgment was coming. The tension was unbearable, the heat oppressive, but in that moment he realized something. Survival in this room required more than courage. It required understanding, awareness, and perhaps even humility. For the first time in his life, Connor understood that the day would be remembered not for the act itself, but for what came next. And he also realized, with a cold pang of fear, that the woman he had sprayed, the very Admiral, had the power to change everything about his life from this moment forward. Connor remained frozen, seated in the stark briefing room, his fingers gripping the edge of the chair until his knuckles whitened. The sting of the pepper spray still lingered in the air, a pungent reminder of his catastrophic error. Outside the room, muffled voices of medics, instructors, and other trainees created a chaotic backdrop. But inside, all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The Admiral, Elise Harland, stood only a few feet away, composed, commanding, her eyes locked onto his with unyielding intensity. Every instinct screamed at him to apologize, to explain, to justify, but he could barely form words. "You," she said finally, voice calm yet carrying the weight of authority that made every syllable feel like a verdict. "Have two choices: hide behind excuses or learn something from this." Connor blinked rapidly, confusion and fear warring in his mind. Learning from this. He had just assaulted the base's highest-ranking officer, albeit accidentally. Punishment should have followed, court-martial, dismissal. The idea that she could see potential instead of incompetence seemed impossible. "Ma'am," he started, but the words caught in his throat, weak and hesitant. Elise stepped closer, her presence filling the room with an almost tangible pressure. "I want to know why you acted without identifying your target," she said. The words were sharp, precise, like the edge of a blade, and yet they were not angry. Not exactly. They demanded honesty, accountability, qualities she evidently found lacking in many. Connor swallowed hard, feeling heat rise to his cheeks. I didn't want to look weak," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to act quickly, to show initiative, his words stumbled. Initiative, courage, confidence. They sounded hollow now, flimsy against the enormity of the mistake he had just made. Elise nodded slowly, as if weighing his words against some invisible scale. "Impulse masquerades as courage," she said, packing with measured steps. "Confidence without thought is meaningless. Acting without observation is how soldiers get themselves and others killed." She stopped, the cold intensity of her gaze pinning him to the spot. "And yet," she continued, softer but no less commanding, "mistakes are not always fatal. They reveal character. They reveal potential." Connor's stomach knotted. Was this a reprieve? Or a warning? The line between punishment and opportunity blurred in her eyes. He had been ready to be reprimanded, humiliated, or worse, but now he realized she wasn't angry, not yet. She was testing him. "You will train under me," she said suddenly, decisively. "Directly, no exceptions. You will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow. You will follow every instruction, no matter how small. Your mistakes will be magnified, your successes observed closely." Her voice left no room for argument. "Do you understand?" Connor's mind raced. Train under the Admiral, the woman he had sprayed. Was this a punishment, a test, or something else? "Why, yes, ma'am," he stammered, his voice barely steady. "Good," she said, returning to her composed stance. "Now sit quietly and think, reflect. You have made a grave error today, but this error can either define you or it can be the beginning of your growth. Choose wisely." The weight of her words pressed down on Connor. His thoughts spiraled. Would he survive this? Could he actually learn anything from a mistake this catastrophic? The room seemed smaller, hotter, the shadows stretching along the walls like judgment itself. He tried to breathe evenly, forcing calm into his racing heart. Over the next few minutes, medics returned, cautiously assisting Elise with the lingering effects of the spray. Connor remained seated, head bowed, guilt gnawing at him like a relentless predator. Yet he couldn't help stealing glances at her. Even battered by the spray, she radiated control, authority, and a presence that made him feel both small and exposed. This was a woman who had earned respect without shouting, without theatrics, and Connor realized with a pang of awe that he was witnessing discipline in its purest form. Finally, Elise motioned for him to rise. "Tomorrow, you will begin with observation drills. You will watch, absorb, and reflect. Mistakes like today are instructive if you allow them to be. Fail to learn, and the consequences will be far worse than pepper spray." Her voice softened ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Today, you were reckless. Tomorrow, you will begin to learn restraint." Connor nodded, swallowing hard. Words felt inadequate, but he understood the gravity of the opportunity and the danger of failure. He left the briefing room, stepping carefully, like each footfall might trigger another disaster. Outside, the field was returning to normal. Role players whispered and laughed nervously, unaware of the high-level consequences that had just unfolded. That night, sleep eluded Connor. He replayed the incident endlessly, every detail sharpened by guilt and fear. The sting of the spray, the blur of confusion, the sharp voice of the Admiral, all haunted him. Yet beneath the fear, a spark of determination flickered. He had survived the immediate aftermath. Now he needed to survive the training, the scrutiny, and the intense, relentless mentorship that awaited him. The next morning arrived brutally early. Connor reported to Elise's office, boots echoing against the polished floor. She was already there, reviewing documents with calm efficiency. She did not acknowledge his presence beyond a sharp nod, but the weight of her gaze was enough to flatten his confidence into something raw, malleable, and ready for refinement. "Observe," she commanded. "Do not act until instructed. Watch closely. Every movement, every decision, every reaction will be scrutinized. You will not fail twice." Connor nodded again, heart thudding with nervous energy. He followed her silently, feeling the enormity of his error and the enormity of the opportunity stretching before him. Each drill, each command, each action now carried significance far beyond a simple training exercise. He understood in that moment that survival alone would no longer suffice. To redeem himself, to earn trust, he would need to absorb every lesson, anticipate every consequence, and learn discipline on a level he had never imagined. By the end of that morning, Connor had watched more carefully than ever before. He observed mistakes in others, noting the subtle misjudgments that could have led to disaster. He noted how Elise responded to errors, with precision, calm authority, and unrelenting evaluation. And slowly, he began to see that she was not just assessing him, she was shaping him, preparing him for challenges far beyond his imagination. As he left the training field that morning, sweat-drenched and exhausted, Connor realized something profound. His mistake had been catastrophic, but it had also given him access to one of the most exacting minds in the military. Today, he had survived. Tomorrow, he would begin to learn. And for the first time, fear and respect combined to form something new: determination. Connor understood, deep in his bones, that life at Fort Page would never be the same. He had just sprayed the wrong person, but that wrong person, that uncompromising, commanding force of an admiral, might just become the one person capable of transforming him from a reckless rookie into a soldier who could truly endure anything. And somewhere deep inside, against all the terror and guilt, a spark of hope ignited. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive and even thrive. The morning sun had barely risen when Connor stood outside Rear Admiral Elise Harlan's office, boots polished, uniform crisp, and nerves stretched taut like a drawn bowstring. The crisp air did little to soothe his tension. Every sound, the click of boots on tile, the distant hum of vehicles, the chatter of early shift soldiers, felt magnified. Today was the first real test of his so-called redemption, direct training under the Admiral herself. He had survived his initial mistake, endured the humiliating moment of spraying her with pepper spray, but now the true challenge began. Every misstep could define him or destroy him. When the door opened, Elise's presence filled the narrow hallway. Her posture was impeccable, every step measured, her expression unreadable yet commanding. She motioned for him to follow. No words, no small talk, no pity, just her presence and the silent expectation that he would absorb, learn, and perform. Connor fell into step behind her, aware that his heartbeat was the only sound louder than the echo of their boots. The first lesson came quickly. She led him to a training scenario, one that was deceptively simple: a simulated urban environment, role players scattered among mock streets and buildings, alarms blaring intermittently. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but Connor could sense that Elise had designed the exercise to expose weaknesses, test judgment, and pressure him in ways that no ordinary drill could. "Observe," she instructed, stopping at the entrance to the simulation zone. "Do not act until I give the signal. Watch everything. Every movement matters." Connor nodded, eyes scanning the scene. His first instinct was to reach for the pepper spray, to act decisively as he had the day before, but he stopped himself. He remembered her words: "Confidence without judgment is meaningless." He forced his breathing to slow, forcing his racing thoughts into a narrow, disciplined focus. Minutes passed, and he began to notice subtle errors in the role player's movements, gestures that suggested aggression, hesitation, or panic. He cataloged them silently, mentally tracking patterns, noting safe zones, and recognizing potential threats. This was observation, Elise had said, observation before action. and Connor realized he had never truly observed anything in his life, not with focus, not with purpose. Then came the first challenge. A role player brandished a mock weapon and began advancing toward the simulated civilian group. Connor's pulse quickened. He wanted to act. He remembered the previous day's mistake and forced himself to pause. His eyes darted around, scanning for other threats, assessing the situation. Another role player edged closer, attempting to flank the civilians. Connor's muscles tensed, but he restrained them. He analyzed, prioritized, calculated. Now, Elise's voice cut through the chaos. Connor reacted, but differently this time. He moved decisively, positioning himself to shield the mock civilians, using controlled gestures, verbal commands, and tactical positioning. Every movement was deliberate, every decision informed by observation, assessment, and restraint. The scenario ended without injury, the role players backing down as if acknowledging his authority. Elise observed silently, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but Connor could sense approval in the tilt of her head. "Explain your choices," she commanded. Connor swallowed, voice trembling slightly. I prioritized the immediate threat while maintaining situational awareness. I didn't react to the first aggressive action alone because another threat appeared from the side. I wanted to protect the civilians while minimizing unnecessary risk. She nodded, silent for a moment. Then, "You thought before acting. That is the difference between a soldier and a reactionary. Mistakes are forgiven when they teach discipline. Learn to act with awareness and mistakes become rare." Connor felt a mixture of relief and awe. He realized he had just survived a situation that would have previously led to panic, error, or worse. And it was Elise, the very Admiral he had sprayed, guiding him through it, teaching him restraint instead of issuing punishment. But the day was far from over. Elise continued the drills with relentless intensity, each scenario escalating in complexity. She simulated ambushes, hostage situations, and rapid-fire threat assessments. Connor was forced to make split-second decisions while continuously observing, calculating, and prioritizing. Sweat drenched his uniform, his muscles ached, and his mind felt stretched thin. But with each correct response, each carefully measured decision, a new confidence began to take root. Not the reckless bravado he had relied on before, but a quiet, controlled authority. Between exercises, Elise did not coddle or praise him. Instead, she offered blunt assessments, pointing out every minor error, every lapse in judgment, every hesitation. "Your first instinct is often wrong," she said sharply after one exercise. "Your second instinct must be deliberate. Control your reflexes or they will control you." Connor nodded, absorbing every word, knowing that failure here was not just visible, it was instructive. By midday, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. His limbs were heavy, his throat dry, and his head buzzed from constant mental strain. Yet Elise showed no mercy. She guided him through another complex scenario, a simulated breach of a perimeter with multiple role players, alarms blaring and conflicting threats. Connor hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Elise to glance at him sharply. Her stare alone refocused his attention, sharpening his awareness. He moved swiftly, decisively, protecting civilians, assessing flanks, and neutralizing threats, without overreacting, without panic. When the exercise concluded, he collapsed onto a bench, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. Elise stood before him, arms crossed, expression stoic. Connor expected a lecture, a reprimand, even a reminder of yesterday's mistake. Instead, she said, "You are beginning to understand. Observation before action, awareness over instinct. Confidence is only meaningful when paired with discipline. This is the foundation of leadership." Connor nodded, overwhelmed by exhaustion, relief, and a growing sense of purpose. For the first time, he understood that Elise's presence was not punishment. It was mentorship of the highest order. She had exposed his weaknesses, challenged him relentlessly, and forced him to confront his own reflexes, fears, and judgments. That evening back in his barracks, Connor replayed the day in his mind. He visualized each scenario, each decision, each action taken under Elise's scrutinizing gaze. The mistakes he had made previously seemed almost childish now, stark contrasts to the controlled responses he had executed under her guidance. The realization was humbling and motivating. He had seen the difference between raw reaction and calculated action. He had felt the weight of leadership, even in a simulated environment. As night fell over Fort Page, the sounds of the base settling into quiet echoed through the barracks. Connor lay on his bunk, body aching, mind racing. He could not forget the burning sting of the pepper spray, the shock of recognition when he realized he had sprayed the Admiral, or the intensity of Elise's gaze as she guided him through the day. Yet alongside fear and guilt, a new resolve took root. He would endure, learn, and become the soldier she expected him to be. Tomorrow promised another day of relentless drills, heightened stakes, and impossible challenges. But Connor was beginning to understand the lesson Elise had imparted. Mistakes could destroy or they could teach. And he was ready to learn. The morning air was crisp and sharp when Connor arrived at the training field, boots clicking against the concrete, uniform damp from the early summer humidity. He had barely slept, mind replaying the previous day's events on a loop, the pepper spray incident, the Admiral's piercing gaze, and the grueling exercises that tested his every instinct. Today promised no relief. Elise Harlan had already begun observing him from the far end of the field, clipboard in hand, her posture immaculate, every movement precise. Connor's stomach tightened. He felt the weight of her scrutiny as acutely as the sun beating down on his neck. Today, Elise said without preamble, we focus on judgment under pressure. Observation is only useful if paired with swift, correct action. Hesitate unnecessarily and consequences are real. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, but every word carried authority, carrying the invisible weight of command. Connor swallowed hard, nodding. He understood that the stakes had escalated. This was not about physical prowess anymore. This was about mental acuity, decision-making under pressure, and restraint in the face of chaos. The first exercise began with a simulated perimeter breach. Multiple role players emerged from hidden locations, armed with mock weapons, shouting, gesturing, testing his awareness. Connor's first instinct was to spring into action, to reach for the canister at his side, but the memory of yesterday's mistake froze his arm mid-motion. Elise's sharp gaze met his across the field, the silence between them amplifying every heartbeat. Connor forced himself to scan the environment, observing each movement carefully, cataloging potential threats. A civilian role player screamed, stumbling backward in terror. Connor's eyes darted, mapping the threat vectors. One role player had drifted close to the civilian's flank. Another, hidden behind a structure, was attempting to ambush. Connor's hands clenched, his body tense, yet he remained still, calculating. Then Elise's voice cut through. Now. Connor acted. Every step precise, measured, deliberate. He intercepted the ambusher, directing civilians to safety, maintaining awareness of the peripheral threats. His movements were fluid but calculated, reactive yet controlled, a stark contrast to the impulsive actions that had led to yesterday's disaster. The exercise concluded, and Elise approached without a word, her face unreadable. Connor's chest heaved, sweat soaking through his uniform, muscles trembling from exertion and tension. "Explain," she commanded. Connor took a deep breath. "I prioritized civilian safety first, observed peripheral threats, and positioned myself to mitigate risk. I restrained immediate reactions to assess the situation fully before acting." Elise nodded slowly, jotting notes on her clipboard. "Correct. Observation informs action. Reaction without thought endangers everyone. Today, you began to understand the difference between instinct and judgment." Her words were sparse, but Connor felt a surge of pride mixed with exhaustion. The lesson was seared into his mind, not by punishment but by demonstration and experience. The drills continued throughout the day, growing progressively more challenging. Elise introduced dynamic variables, changing role-player behaviors, unexpected obstacles, and time-sensitive scenarios that required split-second judgment. Connor was pushed to his limits. Each scenario demanded not just observation but analysis, decision-making, and precise execution under pressure. The physical strain was intense, but the mental strain was even greater. He began to notice a subtle shift within himself. The fear that had once dominated his actions was replaced by a nascent awareness, a calm readiness tempered by caution. Midway through the morning, Elise paused the exercises. She called Connor over, motioning him to stand at attention. "Mistakes reveal character," she said, voice even but commanding. "Yesterday you acted without observation. Today you delayed action to observe first. Tomorrow you must anticipate, predict, prepare. Execution without anticipation is failure. Understand?" Connor nodded, absorbing every word. The training was no longer about avoiding mistakes. It was about building a framework of anticipation, mental agility, and disciplined action. Every lesson reinforced the idea that leadership was not about brute force or quick reflexes. It was about calculated decisions and the ability to adapt in real time. Elise resumed the exercises, but Connor noticed something subtle. Her observation was no longer purely evaluative. She tested him deliberately, introducing scenarios that probed his understanding, challenged his judgment, and forced him to think beyond the immediate. One scenario involved a role player feigning injury while another advanced with a mock weapon. Connor had to identify deception, prioritize threats, and act without hesitation. He stumbled once, misjudging a position, but Elise's sharp correction guided him, her eyes demanding attention, her words precise. By late afternoon, Connor was physically drained, yet his mind buzzed with newfound clarity. Each decision he made was more deliberate, every movement calculated, every reaction tempered by observation. He began to understand the subtle art of restraint, the difference between instinctual reaction and deliberate action. He realized that Elise's mentorship was not punitive, it was transformative. She was shaping him, forging a soldier capable of not just surviving but excelling under pressure. As the day wound down, Elise gathered him in a quiet corner of the field. "Today, you learned observation, patience, and judgment. You made minor mistakes, yes, but you corrected them in real time. That is growth." Her voice was calm, yet the authority behind it carried weight that sank deep into Connor's consciousness. "Tomorrow, we escalate. Your perception, decision-making, and restraint will be tested further. Prepare yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally. Mistakes will be more costly. Success will be measured not by avoidance of error, but by the precision of your response under pressure." Connor nodded, a mix of exhaustion, fear, and determination coursing through him. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the training field. Soldiers departed, leaving Connor standing with Elise, both silhouettes against the fading light. He realized that he was no longer the same rookie who had blindly sprayed the Admiral in panic. He had begun a transformation, guided by a mentor whose expectations were relentless, whose standards were exacting, and whose methods pushed him beyond the limits he had imagined. That night back in his barracks, Connor replayed the day in vivid detail. The scenarios, the decisions, the split-second judgments, all became lessons etched into his mind. He reflected on Elise's words: anticipate, prepare, execute. Mistakes were no longer merely embarrassing, they were instructive, shaping him into a soldier capable of precision under pressure. His body ached, but his mind felt sharper than ever. As he lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, he realized something profound. The fear and guilt of yesterday had been necessary. They had forced him to confront his reflexes, his impulsiveness, and his lack of control. Now, under Elise's guidance, he was learning the true meaning of discipline. Leadership was not about bravado. It was about awareness, restraint, and deliberate action. Connor closed his eyes, exhaustion mingling with resolve. Tomorrow promised new challenges, greater complexity, and the relentless scrutiny of a mentor who would not tolerate weakness. Yet beneath the fear, a spark of confidence had ignited, a quiet understanding that he could rise to meet these challenges, that he could transform his mistake into a foundation for growth. He had survived the immediate consequences of his error. Now he would endure the lessons that could redefine him. And he was ready. The dawn was pale and thin, but already the Fort Page training grounds were alive with activity. Connor Willis arrived before the sun fully rose, his boots tapping lightly against the asphalt, uniform pressed and spotless, his mind buzzing with anticipation. The events of the previous days had transformed the way he approached each morning, each drill. He was no longer the impulsive rookie who had sprayed the Admiral in panic. He had become a soldier who observed, calculated, and prepared. Yet today promised a new level of difficulty, a high-stakes exercise designed to test his judgment, agility, and composure under pressure. Admiral Elise Harland was already on the field, standing with the calm precision of a commander who never hurried but always commanded presence. Her eyes swept the field with razor-sharp focus, as if each object, each trainee, and each shadow belonged to her scrutiny. Connor felt the weight of her gaze as he approached, heart thudding. He knew that even the slightest hesitation could cost him dearly. "Today," Elise announced without preamble, "you will face a live scenario evaluation. Your task is not just to react, but to anticipate. Every action, every decision, and every failure will be observed. You will protect civilians, neutralize threats, and make choices under duress. Do not rely on instinct alone. Anticipate, prepare, execute." Her words left no room for misinterpretation. Connor nodded, swallowing hard, his palms damp with nervous sweat. The exercise began. A mock urban environment had been set up across the field, with abandoned vehicles, stacked crates, narrow alleyways, and simulated hostages. Role players moved unpredictably, shouting, gesturing, and occasionally feigning injury. The alarms blared, a shrill reminder that hesitation was not an option. Connor's first instinct was to act immediately, but he forced himself to breathe, to observe, to catalog threats before committing to action. Minutes stretched as he surveyed the scene. One role player advanced aggressively, another lurked behind a crate attempting to ambush, while a third feigned injury, drawing attention away from an approaching civilian in danger. Connor's mind raced, calculating risk, prioritizing targets, and determining the optimal path. He felt his muscles tense, his body coiled like a spring, but he restrained himself, recalling Elise's constant admonitions, observation before action. Then came the first real test. The role player with the mock weapon lunged toward a group of civilians. Connor reacted, not recklessly, but with precise, deliberate movements. He positioned himself strategically, shouting commands, using verbal authority to direct civilians to safety while simultaneously neutralizing the immediate threat. Another assailant attempted to flank from the side, but Connor had anticipated this possibility, adjusting his position and blocking the path without panicking. Every step was calculated, every action informed by observation. Elise watched silently, her face unreadable, every jot on her clipboard deliberate. Connor could feel the invisible weight of her judgment pressing down on him. Each decision carried significance. Each error would be scrutinized. Yet even as adrenaline surged, fear mingling with exhaustion, a new confidence began to take root. He realized that he could control his reactions, and that control, combined with anticipation, was far more powerful than mere instinct. The exercise escalated further. Sirens blared, additional role players entered from unexpected angles, and civilians began scattering unpredictably. Connor was forced to split his focus across multiple threats, adapting instantly while keeping his primary objective clear. At one point, he noticed a role player attempting to create chaos among the civilians, drawing attention away from an approaching armed threat. He acted decisively, redirecting civilians while neutralizing the threat, all without hesitation. His previous errors, the panic, the impulsive spray, felt like distant memories, replaced by a controlled, methodical execution of skill. Midway through the exercise, Elise called a halt. Connor expected criticism, a lecture, or at least a stern word. Instead, she walked over, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. "Explain your decisions," she commanded. Connor's voice was steady, tinged with both exhaustion and newfound confidence. I prioritized civilian safety first, then neutralized immediate threats while maintaining awareness of flanking positions. I adjusted my actions based on changing threats, and I avoided reacting prematurely to distractions meant to draw me off task. Elise nodded, jotting notes. Good. You are beginning to understand the core of leadership. Observation and anticipation allow a soldier to act effectively under pressure. You made minor errors, but you corrected them in real time. That is progress. The next series of drills introduced unpredictable complications. Role players feigning surrender, sudden alarms signaling multiple simultaneous threats, and limited visibility due to smoke and obstacles. Connor's body screamed with fatigue, his muscles burning, yet he persisted. Every decision mattered. Every moment required vigilance. And every time he hesitated, Elise's piercing gaze reminded him that there was no room for doubt. By late afternoon, the simulated environment had grown chaotic. Civilians were scattered, multiple assailants advanced unpredictably, and the alarms blared incessantly. Connor moved through the chaos with focus and precision, issuing commands, redirecting civilians and neutralizing threats. His actions were deliberate, his decisions informed by observation and anticipation rather than reaction. For the first time, he felt the exhilaration of controlled competence, the rush of making the right choice under intense pressure. Finally, Elise called an end to the exercise. Connor collapsed onto a bench, drenched in sweat, muscles trembling, lungs burning. The adrenaline still coursed through him, but a new awareness had taken hold. He was capable of executing complex, high-pressure tasks with precision. Elise approached, her expression still unreadable, yet there was something in the tilt of her head, a subtle acknowledgement of his growth. "Today, you faced multiple simultaneous threats and succeeded," she said. "You made minor errors, but you corrected them immediately. That is the difference between a reactive soldier and one who can lead. Tomorrow, we escalate further. Expect greater complexity, higher stakes, and less margin for error." Connor nodded, understanding that the lessons were relentless, the expectations exacting. He left the field physically drained but mentally sharpened. Each moment of exhaustion had been a lesson. Each decision, each correction had built his understanding of judgment, anticipation, and controlled action. Back in the barracks that evening, Connor reviewed the day in his mind. He replayed each scenario, each decision, each split-second choice. He noted what went right, what went wrong, and where he could improve. The fear of his previous mistake, the infamous pepper spray incident, was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it was instructive, a reminder that errors, when acknowledged and learned from, could transform weakness into strength. As he lay on his bunk, muscles aching, mind racing, Connor realized the full weight of the Admiral's mentorship. She was relentless, demanding, and unforgiving, but also capable of shaping a soldier through guidance, precision, and unwavering standards. He understood now that leadership was forged not through brute force or instinct, but through careful observation, disciplined action, and the courage to learn from mistakes. Tomorrow would bring new drills, new threats, and even greater challenges, but Connor was ready. For the first time, he understood that survival alone was no longer the goal. Competence, control, and decisive, informed action were what mattered, and with Elise Harland guiding him, he had a chance not only to redeem himself but to become a soldier worthy of respect. He closed his eyes, exhaustion mingling with determination. Mistakes could destroy, or they could teach. Today had proven the latter. The air at Fort Page was thick with humidity and tension when Connor arrived at the training field that morning. His muscles were still sore from the previous day's grueling exercises, and his mind churned with anticipation. Today, Admiral Elise Harland had promised a test unlike any other, something she described as the ultimate measure of observation, judgment, and composure under pressure. Connor wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew it would push him to his limits. His mistake from days earlier, the pepper spray incident, still haunted him, but now it fueled his determination to prove himself. Elise was already on the field, standing near the edge of a sprawling mock-urban environment. Her presence was commanding as always, her expression unreadable, arms folded. The first thing Connor noticed was that there were no instructions waiting for him. No briefing, no preparation, only the silent expectation that he would act correctly or fail. "You know the rules," Elise said finally, her voice calm yet cutting. "Observation first, anticipation second, action last. Today there will be no pauses, no warnings, no safe mistakes. Every decision will have consequences. Do not falter." Connor nodded, gripping the edges of his uniform, heart pounding. He stepped into the simulated streets, alert to every detail, the placement of crates, abandoned vehicles, and the scattered role players. Unlike previous drills, this one felt chaotic in a new, almost disorienting way. The alarms blared unexpectedly, role players shouted contradictory commands, and the simulated civilians moved unpredictably. Connor felt a flicker of panic, but he forced himself to pause, observe, and analyze. It began immediately. A role player feigned injury on the far side of the alley, drawing Connor's attention. Simultaneously, another simulated assailant approached from behind, attempting to flank him. His instincts wanted to react impulsively, but he remembered Elise's lessons. Observation first, control second, action last. He took a deep breath, cataloged the threats, and moved strategically, positioning himself to protect the civilians while intercepting the immediate threat. The exercise escalated rapidly. Smoke machines filled the streets, obscuring visibility. Additional role players appeared from unexpected locations, some advancing aggressively, others feigning surrender. Connor's mind raced, calculating risk, prioritizing targets, and predicting movements. Every decision mattered. One wrong step could lead to simulated casualties, and Elise was watching every move. At one point, a role player brandished a mock weapon and lunged toward a civilian. Connor reacted instantly, blocking the attack, shielding the civilian, and issuing verbal commands. Another assailant attempted to create a distraction, but Connor anticipated the move, neutralizing the threat without losing focus. Sweat poured down his face, muscles burned, but he remained steady. Each action was deliberate, precise, and informed by observation. Elise observed silently, taking notes, her face unreadable. Connor could feel the weight of her scrutiny pressing down on him, sharper than any physical strain. This was not a drill to test strength or endurance. It was a crucible designed to reveal character, judgment, and leadership under relentless pressure. The chaos intensified. Sirens blared, role players shouted conflicting orders, and simulated civilians moved unpredictably. Connor's focus narrowed, each sense heightened. He moved fluidly through the scenario, issuing commands, redirecting civilians, neutralizing threats, and adapting instantly to unexpected developments. For the first time, he felt the exhilaration of mastery under duress. He was not acting blindly. He was calculating, anticipating, and controlling the chaos around him. Then came the final challenge. A role player attempted to use the confusion to escape with a simulated weapon, while another created a diversion. Connor identified both threats simultaneously, prioritizing the more immediate danger without neglecting the secondary one. His response was swift and precise, neutralizing both threats and securing the civilians. The scenario ended in silence, broken only by the fatting alarms. Connor stood panting, drenched in sweat, his body trembling from exertion. He looked around, half expecting Elise to critique, to admonish, or even to dismiss him for a minor oversight. Instead, she approached silently, her posture calm, her gaze intense. "You have completed the exercise," she said simply, "with only minor errors. But more importantly, you demonstrated observation, anticipation, and composure under pressure. That is what I expect from every soldier under my command." Connor exhaled, a mix of relief and pride washing over him. This was more than a test of skill, it was a test of character. He had begun as a reckless rookie, panicking at the sight of chaos, making mistakes that could have ended his career. Now, under Elise's guidance, he had transformed into a soldier capable of making calculated, precise decisions in high-pressure situations. Elise continued, her voice firm but not unkind. Today, you proved something essential, that mistakes do not define you. Your ability to learn, adapt, and execute with discipline defines you. You have earned my respect, not because you avoided error but because you responded correctly under pressure. Remember this. Connor nodded, absorbing every word. He understood the gravity of the lesson. Survival alone was not enough. Leadership required foresight, control, and the courage to act decisively while remaining aware of every variable. Elise's mentorship had revealed to him the difference between reactive action and deliberate execution, a difference that would shape his career and perhaps his life. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the training field, Connor stood beside Elise, breathing heavily, body exhausted but spirit renewed. He realized that the fire of his initial failure, the day he had sprayed the Admiral, had forged him into someone capable of enduring far greater challenges. What had begun as punishment had become transformation, and he knew that the lessons of today would stay with him forever. Back in the barracks that evening, Connor reflected on the intensity of the day. Every scenario, every split-second decision, every minor error and correction had been a lesson etched into his memory. He felt a profound sense of respect for Elise, not merely as an authority figure, but as a mentor whose standards were exacting, whose methods were relentless, and whose purpose was to shape soldiers into leaders. Connor lay on his bunk, body aching, mind alive with reflection. He realized that he was no longer the same rookie who had acted impulsively, who had allowed fear to dictate his actions. He had grown, incrementally yet profoundly, into a soldier capable of thinking, observing, and executing with precision under pressure. Mistakes would still happen, but he now understood their value. They were tools for growth, not markers of failure. As night fell over Fort Page, Connor resolved that he would meet every challenge with observation, anticipation, and controlled action. Under Elise Harlan's mentorship, he had learned that true strength came not from impulsive courage but from disciplined judgment. The road ahead would be difficult, unrelenting, and punishing, but he was ready. Tomorrow would bring new drills, new threats, and greater demands, but Connor no longer feared them. He had survived chaos. He had learned discipline, and he had earned the respect of one of the most formidable officers in the military. For the first time, he felt not fear but purpose, and that purpose would guide him through whatever trials lay ahead. The following morning at Fort Page, Connor approached the training field with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The aches from yesterday's grueling exercises lingered, but they were overshadowed by a growing confidence. Under Admiral Elise Harlan's relentless mentorship, he had transformed from a reckless, panicked rookie into a soldier capable of controlled, deliberate action. Today, however, promised a different challenge. Leading a small team of fellow trainees through a complex scenario, while Elise observed silently from a distance. Connor met his team at the staging area. 3 other rookies, each competent in their own right, but none yet accustomed to working under the scrutiny of an officer as exacting as Elise. Their faces showed a mix of anticipation and anxiety, mirroring his own emotions just days earlier. Connor squared his shoulders and addressed them, the weight of leadership settling on him like a physical burden. "Listen carefully," he began, voice steady but firm. "We're facing a simulated urban operation. Civilians, hostile actors, and unexpected variables. Your safety and theirs depends on your awareness, your decisions, and your ability to act as a team. Follow my commands, observe everything, and execute deliberately. Hesitation can cost lives. Do you understand?" The team nodded, uncertainty and respect mingling in their eyes. Connor could feel the shift in his own mindset. He no longer relied solely on instinct. He had learned from Elise that leadership demanded observation, anticipation, and calculated execution. Today, he would put those lessons into practice, not for himself, but for others who depended on him. The exercise began. Role players scattered unpredictably through the mock urban environment, alarms blaring, civilians panicking. Connor moved with precision, issuing commands that coordinated his team's movements, prioritizing civilian safety and neutralizing threats efficiently. Every decision was deliberate. Every observation informed his actions. He felt the adrenaline surge, tempered by control and awareness. Midway through the exercise, a complication arose. One of his teammates misjudged a flanking assailant, leaving a civilian exposed. Connor reacted instantly, repositioning both himself and the team member, issuing corrective commands while maintaining situational awareness. The scenario's chaos did not overwhelm him. Instead, he thrived under pressure. He had learned from past mistakes, internalized Elise's lessons, and now applied them in real time. Elise watched silently from a distance, nodding every decision, every corrective action, and every instance of leadership. Connor could feel her scrutiny even without seeing her directly. Her expectations were unspoken but palpable: precision, discipline, and the ability to maintain control under pressure. As the exercise escalated, new threats appeared simultaneously. Role players feigned injury, civilians scattered unpredictably, and an assailant attempted to steal a mock weapon. Connor prioritized targets, delegating tasks to his team, guiding them through the chaos while preventing mistakes from compounding. The teamwork was seamless, the execution near flawless. At one point, a civilian role player was cornered by multiple threats. Connor recognized the danger instantly and acted decisively. He neutralized the immediate threats, directed his team to assist, and secured the civilian, all without hesitation. The scenario concluded successfully, the simulated environment quieting under his team's coordinated control. Elise approached afterward, her gaze evaluating yet calm. "Connor," she said, "today you demonstrated leadership under pressure. You observed, anticipated, and executed effectively. You corrected errors in real time and guided your team successfully. This is the difference between a follower and a leader." Connor exhaled, a mixture of relief, pride, and exhaustion coursing through him. For the first time, he felt that he had truly earned not only Elise's respect but the trust of his peers. The lessons he had absorbed over the past week were no longer theoretical. They had become second nature. Elise continued, her tone still commanding. "Leadership is not about perfection. It is about decision-making under uncertainty, the courage to act correctly despite fear, and the ability to guide others through chaos. Today, you embodied those qualities. Do not forget them." Connor nodded, absorbing every word. He realized that leadership extended beyond drills and simulated scenarios. It was about responsibility, accountability, and trust. He had been reckless once, spraying the Admiral out of fear and confusion. Now, he had become a soldier capable of guiding others, making calculated decisions, and earning respect through competence rather than intimidation. Later that evening, Connor returned to the barracks, exhausted yet exhilarated. He replayed the day in his mind, analyzing every decision, every command, and every corrective action. Mistakes had been made, yes, but each had been addressed and learned from immediately. The growth he had experienced over the past week was undeniable. As he prepared for rest, Connor reflected on the journey he had undertaken. From the panic of the pepper spray incident to the relentless drills, simulations, and high-stakes exercises, he had been pushed to his limits and beyond. Elise Harlan had not only taught him technical skills but had reshaped his mindset, instilling discipline, foresight, and the courage to act deliberately under pressure. Connor realized something profound. True leadership was forged through challenge, observation, and the courage to confront one's own limitations. He had been given an extraordinary opportunity to grow, and he had begun to seize it. The trust he had earned from his peers was a tangible reminder that competence, not fear, built respect. As night fell over Fort Page, Connor lay on his bunk, body exhausted but mind alert. He felt a quiet confidence he had never known before. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and perhaps greater tests of his abilities. But he was ready. He had survived mistakes, endured relentless scrutiny, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. For the first time, Connor understood the true measure of a soldier. Not the absence of error, but the ability to learn, adapt, and lead with precision under pressure. And with Elise Harlan's mentorship, he was no longer just surviving. He was becoming the soldier he had always aspired to be. The morning fog hung low over Fort Page, casting an eerie calm over the training grounds. Connor stepped onto the field, his uniform immaculate, boots echoing sharply against the concrete. Today was the final evaluation, a culmination of everything Admiral Elise Harlan had pushed him to endure. This was no ordinary drill. It was a high-stakes, full-scale simulation designed to test every skill he had developed: observation, anticipation, judgment, leadership, and composure under pressure. Connor felt the familiar tension of adrenaline and fear, but beneath it, a newfound confidence steadied him. He was no longer the rookie who had panicked and sprayed the Admiral. Elise stood at the edge of the training area, clipboard in hand, posture as commanding as ever. Her eyes swept the field, landing on Connor. She did not speak, but the weight of her presence communicated everything he needed to know. She expected excellence. The entire base seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. "Connor Willis," Elise said finally, her voice carrying across the field. "Today, you will lead a coordinated operation against multiple simultaneous threats while ensuring the safety of civilians. Fail, and the consequences are yours. Succeed, and you demonstrate mastery of all the lessons you have learned. Begin." Connor took a deep breath and moved forward, immediately scanning the complex mock urban environment. Civilians were scattered, alarms blared unpredictably, and role players advanced with aggression and unpredictability. His mind cataloged each movement, each variable, calculating priorities, predicting outcomes. This was the ultimate test: chaos multiplied, variables uncountable, stakes higher than ever. The first threat emerged quickly. A role player brandished a mock weapon and moved toward a civilian group. Connor reacted with precision, blocking the assailant, directing his team to secure the civilians, and neutralizing secondary threats. Each action was deliberate, measured, and informed by observation. Mistakes were minimal, but awareness remained absolute. Suddenly, a secondary threat appeared. A role player attempted to flank the civilians from a blind corner. Connor anticipated the move instantly, repositioning both himself and his team. Commands were issued calmly, yet firmly, guiding each teammate to their positions, ensuring coverage of all vulnerable angles. The scenario intensified further. Role players feigned surrender, mock explosions erupted, and simulated gunfire echoed. Connor's training under Elise had prepared him for this exact chaos, yet the pressure was unlike anything he had faced before. Midway through the exercise, a crisis emerged. A civilian role player was cornered between two threats. Connor's team hesitated, unsure of the correct course of action. He assessed the situation instantly, calculating risk and determining the optimal response. With precise commands, he guided his team to neutralize the threats while securing the civilian, maintaining both control and composure. Elise observed silently from a distance, expression unreadable. Connor felt her scrutiny like a physical weight pressing down on him, but he did not falter. He had internalized her lessons: observe before acting, anticipate, execute deliberately, and maintain control under pressure. The exercise demanded everything he had learned, and more. As the simulation reached its climax, additional variables were introduced. Role players attempted to create distractions, civilians moved unpredictably, and alarms blared in rapid succession. Connor's focus narrowed, his mind operating at peak clarity. He moved through the chaos with fluid precision, issuing commands, coordinating his team, neutralizing threats, and securing civilians. Every action was deliberate. Every decision was informed by observation and anticipation. Finally, the scenario concluded. The field fell silent, the alarms fading into the distance. Connor's body was drenched in sweat, muscles trembling from exertion, but his mind was sharper than ever. He stood amidst the mock environment, surveying the results of the exercise. Civilians were safe, threats neutralized, and his team had executed flawlessly under his direction. Elise approached, her presence commanding as always. Connor straightened, awaiting her evaluation, heart pounding. She stopped a few feet away, her expression still composed but her eyes sharp and assessing. "You have completed the final evaluation," she said, voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. "With minimal errors. You demonstrated observation, anticipation, judgment, composure, and leadership. You corrected mistakes in real time, guided your team effectively, and maintained control under extreme pressure. This is the standard I expect from every soldier under my command." Connor exhaled, a mixture of relief, pride, and exhaustion coursing through him. He realized he had reached the culmination of his journey, from a panicked, impulsive rookie who had sprayed the Admiral to a disciplined, competent leader capable of commanding respect under extreme conditions. Elise continued, her tone softer now, though still authoritative. "Connor Willis, you have earned my respect, not through avoiding mistakes, but through your ability to learn, adapt, and execute with precision. Leadership is not measured by flawless performance, but by the courage to act correctly under pressure and the wisdom to learn from error. You have proven that you possess both qualities." Connor felt a swell of emotion, relief, pride, gratitude. The journey had been relentless, pushing him to physical and mental extremes, challenging every assumption and testing his limits. And yet, through it all, he had grown into a soldier capable of handling responsibility, guiding others, and facing chaos with composure. Elise stepped closer, her piercing gaze locking with his. "Remember this moment. The lessons you have learned, the skills you have honed, and the discipline you have developed are yours to carry forward. Mistakes will come, challenges will arise, but if you apply what you have learned, you will succeed where others fail." Connor nodded, understanding fully. He had earned more than competence. He had earned trust, respect, and a foundation for a future defined not by panic or error, but by skill, judgment, and leadership. As the sun dipped low over Fort Page, Connor walked off the field, exhausted but invigorated. He reflected on the journey, the panic and guilt of the pepper spray incident, the relentless training, the mental and physical strain, the mentorship of Admiral Elise Harland, and the growth he had achieved. Each challenge had forged him into a stronger, wiser, and more capable soldier. That night as he lay on his bunk, Connor felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Mistakes had not destroyed him, they had transformed him. Under the guidance of one of the most formidable officers in the military, he had learned discipline, observation, judgment, and leadership. He was no longer the rookie who had acted impulsively. He was a soldier capable of thriving under pressure, earning the respect of peers and superiors alike. Connor closed his eyes, exhaustion mingling with satisfaction and determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, and new responsibilities, but he was ready. He had survived failure, endured rigorous training, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. And for the first time, Connor knew that he was not just a soldier, he was a leader.